Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Today is our sixth lecture. This is of global business management. There are two basic objectives of today's lecture. The first one is to understand the theoretical underpinnings of why countries trade with each other. This is the first objective. And the next one is to be aware of the different theories that explain trade flows between nations. These are the two basic objectives of learning objectives of today's lecture. Before we proceed to the next today's lecture, we quickly recap of the last lecture, in which we had discussed from the different scenarios from the home country's perspective, host country's perspective, and the international relations and laws. These are the three things that we had discussed in the last lecture. The first of all, we had discussed the home country's perspective, and the major areas of government activities that are of concern to the international business managers are embargoes and sanctions, and the second one is export controls and regulation of international business behavior. These are the three different areas where international managers should know about these areas, and how these areas and how they are going to impact on their international activity. The first one is sanctions and embargoes, which refer to government actions that distorts free flows of trade in goods and service for political purpose rather than economic purpose. The main aim with sanction is to push or force that country to behave more peacefully, more sensibly in the international floor. This is the main objective of putting the sanction on that country. The next one is export controls. Firms can put the export controls as well. Most countries have export control system designed to deny or at least delay the acquisition of strategically important goods rival. What are the different steps when the government put the export or when the control, or when the government allows some firms to conduct the export? The first of all, like in Department of Commerce in USA, a firm put the application to allow for certain product to allow the export from America to some other country. What the Department of Commerce does? The first of they are going to consider, should a given product be exported. They are going to see the product. And how they are going to do that? That department has the list of products which are allowed and which are banned to export, and they are going to match this product with both lists. If that product is allowed to export, in the next step, then they are going to see, that department is going to see to which country is going to be exported. Again, they have the list of the countries where certain exports are allowed or not allowed, or certain products are not allowed to certain countries. They are going to match with that product with the name of the countries. And then the third one is for use by a given firm. What are the purpose? This firm has to show that, have to provide the evidence that where they are exporting, the name of the product, the country, and to which firm they are exporting that product. And of course then the Department of Commerce is going to see what are the purpose of that product. Are they going to use that product in a right way, or is there possibility that this product will be misused in some aspects? Okay, mean these sanctions or exports are from the domestic government. They use these tactics to for the international activity. But important thing is during the last decades, the situation of global international market is changed because of 5 reasons, and therefore the exports and these sanctions are now considered in different way. The first reason is collapse of Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc. Now the Soviet Union has been collapsed, and the Eastern Bloc came out from the influence of the from the Soviet Union. Because in the early days and the early when they made the GATT in 1948, 53 countries signed that agreement, and in that time the world was polarized between this industrialized nation, US, Europe and Japan, and the other side they have the Soviet bloc. And after the collapse of Soviet bloc, the situation, the political scenario is changed in the global world. The second thing is focus is shifted to third world countries. Again, like we said in the first point, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, before the focus was on the Soviet Union, now the focus is shifted to third world countries. In third world countries, they are more concentrated on the like Iraq or Iran, North Korea, Cuba or Venezuela. These countries are in more focus of trade embargoes or sanctions or export bans. The third point is losing bond between the allied nations. In the early decades, in the early years, they were very closely united with, tightly connected with each other, and they were more concerned about the other countries, and therefore they were whenever they make their decision, they were collectively, they make the decision. But after the collapse of Soviet Union and the formation of the EU, the bond between those countries are now much weaker. The fourth one is availability of technology from other resources. This is another important point, that before, in certain years, certain decades ago, the source of technology was only the Europe and USA, but the emergence of some other countries like China and Russia and Brazil and India, the sources of technology is changed. If certain countries are not getting that technology or technology-oriented products from the USA or from Europe, they can avail those products from other sources as well. Okay, the next point is speed of change and rapid dissemination of information and innovation around the world. This is the next point. And the issue of equipment size, like we had discussed just in the last lecture, that equipment of size is really substantially reduced, like power computer computer sizes, and is substantially reduced from really huge size to very micro sizes. The next point is regulating international behavior through boycotts, antitrust laws, bribery, general acceptable standards of ethics. The international regulatory bodies have to tackle these things, like boycotts within the countries. Like Arab countries, they boycott the multinational firms who are operational in Israel. They don't buy product from those countries, and Arab countries frequently demand assurance from the foreign countries that those products are not manufactured in Israel. Antitrust laws, they have, in these international regulatory bodies, have to keep an eye on the antitrust laws, that firms are not making some merger and acquisitions or joint ventures to create the monopolistic environment within the market. Bribery is the third thing. Bribery, they have to consider the bribery, they have to see this or control the bribery, but in certain countries it's inevitable to give the bribery or some to speed up their processes or to smoothen their business transaction within those countries. Like in third world countries, especially particularly in developing countries, bribery is very important, considered as greasing the wheel. And the last one is the general acceptable standards and ethics. This is the fourth thing, that these international regulatory bodies are expecting some level of ethics or standards from other countries. Like in Brazil, if Brazil is cutting down the rainforest, of course this rainforest belongs to Brazil, and they can raise some capital from the cutting of those rainforest. But from ethical point of view, this is not good, and from the global from the other countries, they are really concerned of cutting down of the rainforest because of the environmental issues. Similarly, China, if they are using the prisoner laborers, and they can use the by using the prisoner labor, there is free of cost labor, and they can cut the prices of products, and they can get the competitive advantage through the low price of the products. But from the other countries' perspective, this is some expectation that China is not going to use that sort of cheap labor. Similarly, in Mexico, if Mexico is not providing the minimum facilities to their employees, safety measures, they are not taking safety measures for their working environment, of course they are saving some money, but this expectation or ethical point of view, this is not acceptable. The next point that we had discussed was political action and risk. From these points are now, this point is from the host country perspective. What they can do when the firm go from the domestic market to the international market, there is a probability that they can do these 4 actions. That government can take that 4 actions, like confiscation, government take over of a firm without compensating to the owner. This is the first thing. Or and the second thing is expropriation, a form of government takeover in which firms' owners are compensated. This is the second point. This is the second danger. The third one is domestication. The government demands transfer of ownership and management responsibility, mean that foreign government can demand that the transfer of entire ownership, or they can demand the inclusion of main domestic management, or they can ask this thing that management should be local people, should be belong to, or majority of the management should be in the hand of the local people. The fourth risk that a firm can face in the foreign market is intellectual property right, risk of losing their core competitive advantage because of the no protection of intellectual property, like in piracy in third world Asian countries. Because of this piracy, the intellectual property is not protected. Okay, in those foreign markets, the firm is also facing the economic risk in form of currency control, taxes, prices control. Currency control might be if a firm is facing trouble with their foreign capital, they can control or prohibit foreign firms to transfer their foreign currency from their market, and they can put some extra taxes to generate more revenue on the foreign products. They can demand from the foreign country, foreign multinational firms, to lower the prices or lower the prices of certain products. So more importantly, this issue is more pertinent to the products of food and basic life, products related to basic necessity. The next one is political risk. Political risk involves ownership, losing of ownership, operating and transfer risk. Government can involve themselves in the operation of the business. The next one is managing risk and legal risk. Managing risk and legal risk, how that multinational firm is going to manage that risk which they are going to encounter in the foreign market. Their most important ways that we had discussed in the last lecture were they can show their concerns to the local market that this multinational firm, that we are concerned with the problems of this country. And how they can do that? They can participate, they can involve themselves in the philanthropy activities, or they can hire more local people and provide them better salaries and provide them better facilities on better terms and conditions. And third way, they can anticipate the political or some risk or change which is possible in the near future. Or in the fourth way, they can manage the tentative risk by doing the insurance of that business. The next issue that we had discussed was there is a difference of legal systems across the world. There are two famous legal systems. The first one is code system and the common code law system and the common law system. If firm is indulge themselves into some sort of trouble, they had faced and they encounter some trouble, then they have two possibilities. First one is the arbitration. That this is the one way that they can go for. Is the procedures are very quicker and often spelled out in the original contract. And the second one is litigation. Firms can involve in the litigation, which often involves extensive delays and is very costly. Okay, what is free trade? Free trade refers to a situation where a government does not attempt to influence through quotas or duties what citizens can buy from another country or what they can produce or sell to another country. Free trade mean when the government is not intervening in the flow from and to flow of products or services from or to the country. They are permitting the other products or services coming into the country without any restrictions, and they are permitting their products or services going out from their country to the foreign country without any restrictions. And what is the most important thing is the beneficiary of this sort of free trade is local the customers or buyers of those products or services. The pattern of international trade. The pattern of some now these are the two patterns that this pattern what we see around the world is the first pattern that we see around the world is which is very easy to explain, is whatever they have, whatever the country has, whatever they possess, they export those things to another countries. Like Saudi Arabia export oil, Ghana export cocoa, Brazil exports coffee. These are the totally acceptable and totally understandable things that we observe around us. But why Switzerland? The important thing that we have to consider is why Switzerland export chemicals, pharmaceuticals, watches and jewelry, and why Japan export automobiles, consumer electronics and machine tools. These are the two different ways. Might be they don't have that sort of things in their by nature. They don't have these things, but even then they are stronger in exporting those things. These are their strongholds and they are exporting these things. And in order to explain this second phenomena or even the first phenomena, trade theories helps to explain this sort of patterns, trade patterns around the world. The trade theory and the government policy. Trade theories lack agreement in their recommendation for government policy. This is the important thing, that there are theories which try to explain those explain that flow of trade across the countries, but these theories are not in accord with each other. The first one that is the mercantilism makes a crude case for government involvement in promoting export and limiting imports. This is the first stance. The theories of Smith-Ricardo and Heckscher-Ohlin promote unrestricted free trade, And the third one is new trade theory and Porter's theory of national competitive advantage justify limited and selective government intervention to support the development of certain export-oriented industries. Important thing is there are various theories which are proposed to explain the trade pattern. And important thing is in this lecture, in today's lecture, we are going to discuss the mercantilism, what it stands for and how it is explained the trade flow. The second one is absolute advantage, how absolute advantage describes or explains the trade flow across the countries. And the third one is competitive advantage concept, how competitive advantage concept explain the trade flow across the countries. And in the next lecture we are going to see the subsequent theories. Before we start looking at the mercantilism, we are going to discuss a small case, which of course you guys are familiar with the rise of China, and we are going to see that to what extent China is following the mercantilism concept. The main features our summary is described as this. This feature claims that China is a new mercantilism nation. Exports are largely responsible for China's recent economic growth. The country, capitalizing on its cheap labor force, has been focused on converting raw materials into products that are exported to developing countries like the United States. In 2005, China's trade surplus was record 121 billion US dollars, and its holding of foreign exchange reserves were over 800 billion. The questions that you guys have to consider are as follows. Are the claims that China is following a new mercantilism policy valid? Why or why not? You have to think in both ways. What incentives does China have to open its market to foreign products? Why might China resist such a move? Important thing is why they open their borders, and the second thing, if they are going to resist this thing, then why they are going to do so. Is there evidence that China is pursuing an important substitution policy? How would this type of policy benefit the country? These are the three questions that you guys are going to think. And of course we are going to see the first of all mercantilism, and then you guys are going to go back again on this case study, and you are going to search the internet and try to find the answer of this case study and these questions. Mercantilism, which emerged in England in mid-16th century, asserted that it is in a country's best interest to maintain a trade surplus. What's the meaning of trade surplus? To export more than its imports. What are the main arguments for mercantilism? Mercantilism educated government intervention to achieve a surplus in the balance of trade. Important thing is the mercantilism asserts that the government, the countries have to maintain a trade surplus. But how they are going to do that? By exporting more as compared to import. It viewed trade as a zero-sum game in which a gain by one country results in a loss by another country. This is the important concept, that this mercantilism is based on zero-sum game in which gain of one country, when they are exporting something to some other country, of course this is the gain for this country A. If country A is exporting some products or services to country B, this is the gain for country A. But on the other hand, this is the loss by of the country B, because they are importing those products. As an economic philosophy, mercantilism is problematic and not valid. Yet, many political views today have the goal of boosting exports while limiting imports by seeking only selective liberalization of trade. Mean they are saying that despite the concept of mercantilism, which initiated in the mid 1600s, 16th century, despite the flaws this concept has, still many philosophers, many economists, they are following this concept in their countries, and they are pushing their governments, their governments are pushing their firms to export more compared to their imports. And importantly, when they had made the liberalization policies, and they were more focused on this concept. They formulated their strategies in such a way that those strategies should encourage export and discourage import. The next topic is absolute advantage. In 1776, Adam Smith suggested that countries differ in their ability to produce goods efficiently. A country has an absolute advantage in the production of product when it is more efficient than any other country in producing it. Mean country has to focus on the production of those products which they have some where they have a stronghold. Mean and where it is more efficient, most cost efficient to produce certain products, and each country have their strongholds. Mean when a country has a stronghold in one thing, they have to produce when they can produce efficiently one product, they have to produce only that product and export that product to another country and import such products which they cannot produce efficiently. This is the famous example of England and France. Back then, the Adam Smith suggested that, for instance, England in that era was very strong with the production of their textile products, and they produced their products efficiently as compared to the other countries. And on the other hand, France was very famous, and they were very efficient on producing the wine. At that time, Adam Smith suggested that what England has to do is to export the textile to France and import that wine. Rather than producing wine by themselves, they have to import that wine from France. I mean, in that way, this is the efficient trade flow for not only for the England but also for the France. Countries should specialize in the production of that product in which they are most cost effective. Now we can assume the example of two countries, Ghana and South Korea, and this is the example we are going to consider for competitive advantage as well. You have to see this example very carefully, because this example contains some numbers. Okay, let's start with this example. There are two countries, first of all Ghana and South Korea. Both have 200 units of resources. These are the basic assumption that could either be used to produce either rice or cocoa. Now important thing is, again we continue with this thing. In Ghana, it takes 10 units of resources to produce 1 ton of cocoa, and 20 units of resources to produce 1 ton of rice. What does it mean? That the stronghold of the efficient production of Ghana is cocoa, the production of cocoa. Why this is more efficient, or this is the stronghold for Ghana? Because it consumes less resources. It consumes only 10 resources as compared to 20 resources for producing 1 ton of rice. On the other hand, we continue with the Ghana. Ghana could produce 20 tons of cocoa or no rice. When all 200 units of resources are used for production of cocoa, then we say that Ghana will be able to produce only 20 tons of cocoa and 0 rice. On the other hand, if these 200 units of resources are used to produce only the rice, then the 10 tons of rice would be produced. These are the two extremes. Either they can use these 200 units for producing cocoa, or 200 units to produce the rice. If they are using these 200 units of resources to produce cocoa, they will produce 20 tons of cocoa, or if they are and zero rice. And if they are using these resources to produce rice, then they are going to produce 20 tons of rice and zero cocoa. On the another extreme, the South Korea takes 20 units of resources to produce 1 ton of cocoa, and 10 resources to produce 1 ton of rice. What does it mean? It means that South Korea could produce 5 tons of cocoa and no rice, and 20 tons of rice and no cocoa, or some combination in between. Important thing is, if again the total resources is 200 units, if South Korea is using those 200 units to produce only cocoa, then they will be able to produce only 5 tons of cocoa. Why? Because the stronghold of South Korea is to produce rice. Why this is so? Because it consumes 10 units of resources to produce 1 ton of rice, as compared to 40 units of resources to produce 1 ton of cocoa. On the other hand, if they utilize all those resources to produce the rice, then what's going to happen? Then they would be able to produce 20 ton of rice and no cocoa. What will be the optimum situation for them? To produce something in between these numbers. Ghana has, now we are comparing both countries. Ghana has an absolute advantage in the production of cocoa, while on the other hand, South Korea has an absolute advantage in producing the rice. If they are not trading with each other, then what going to happen? Ghana would produce 10 tons of cocoa and 5 tons of rice, and South Korea would produce 10 tons of rice and 2.5 tons of cocoa with the 200 units of resources. If each country specializes in the product in which it has an absolute advantage, and trades for each other, trade for the other product, if Ghana stick with only production of cocoa and South Korea stick with the production of rice, then what's going to happen? Ghana would produce 20 tons of cocoa and no rice, and South Korea would produce 20 tons of rice and no cocoa. That means Ghana could trade 6 tons of cocoa to South Korea for 6 tons of rice. Okay, they can make a swap of 6 tons of cocoa to South Korea with the 6 tons of rice, and if they do this sort of swap, what's going to happen? Ghana would have 14 tons of cocoa left and 6 tons of rice, and South Korea would have 14 tons of rice left and 6 tons of cocoa. Both countries gains from trade. Okay, this is a basic example. In this example, as we can see that which shows the absolute advantage of the Ghana from the trade, that Ghana is the main, like we have discussed, the main competency of Ghana is to produce the cocoa, and they can produce the 10 tons of cocoa, and they can produce 20 tons of rice, and South Korea could produce 40 tons of cocoa and 10 tons of rice. On the other hand, production and consumption, if they are not, the above figure shows that this is the optimal level. We are not talking of extreme. We are talking about that Ghana is producing cocoa as well as rice, and South Korea is producing both things as well. If they are producing both things, and the optimal level is 10 and 10 to 20, I mean 10 cocoa and 20 rice, and on the other hand for South Korea 40 to 10. If Ghana is using, if they are not doing any trade with each other, what's going to happen? The Ghana is going to produce 10 tons of cocoa and 5 tons of rice, and similarly South Korea would produce 2.5 tons of cocoa and 10 tons of rice. The total production of cocoa from both countries is 12.5 tons, and the total production from of rice is 15 tons. Okay, production with specialization. If both countries trade with each other, and what's gonna happen? Ghana is only producing cocoa of 20 tons, and South Korea is not producing anything, and Ghana is producing no rice, and South Korea is producing 20. What gonna be total production would be 20 tons of cocoa and 20 tons of rice. If they are producing this thing, if they are making a transaction or swap of 6 tons of cocoa for 6 tons of South Korean rice, then Ghana would get 14 tons of cocoa and 6 tons of rice, and South Korea would get 6 tons of cocoa and 14 tons of rice. The overall benefit of trade for both countries is, for cocoa, for South Korea, for Ghana is 4 tons of cocoa, and for South Korea is 3.5 tons of cocoa, and the other hand is rice 4 tons for Ghana and 4 tons of for South Korea. This is the overall trade benefit for both countries. The next topic is competitive advantage. This is proposed by David Ricardo in 1817. They extended the statement, the proposition of Adam Smith's theory, which is absolute advantage, and one step ahead, and they explained that what might happen when one country has an absolute advantage in the production of all things. When they have the production of, I mean, like before we discussed the example of England and France, when both countries have the competitive advantage in each product. Now this Ricardo, he is expanding this phenomena to the next level, and he is explaining that what if that one country is specialized or stronghold in production of all the things, whether that country need to make a trade with other countries or not. According to Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage, it makes sense for a country to specialize in the production of those goods that it produces most efficiently, and to buy the goods that is produced less efficiently from other countries, even if this means buying goods from other countries that it could produce most efficiently itself. Now this guy is suggesting that despite that, for instance, we can take the example of USA. USA is good at producing the computers, and they are good with producing the textile as well, because of high technology, because of more technological equipment. But what they have to do, rather than producing both things, what they have to do is they can produce more efficiently. Of course, they can produce more efficiently the computer equipment, or computer industry is more highly equipped. They got more competitive advantage in producing computers as compared to textile products. Why? Because they have more stronghold in producing the computer products. What they have to do, but as compared to other countries like Pakistan or India, of course they have better equipment even in textile mills. But according to this theory, what they have to do is, rather than producing both things and exporting both things, what they have to do, they have to produce the computer equipment and export that computer equipment to Pakistan. And on the other hand, what they have to do, rather than producing the textiles, they have textile product, they have to import that textile product from Pakistan, because maybe Pakistan have the a little bit competitive advantage over USA with the cheap labor, and they can and USA has to import that textile products from Pakistan to US. This theory says that despite that USA is able to produce the more efficient textile product as well, but they have to focus more on computer products. Okay, we can continue the example of Ghana and South Korea. Now the thing is, Ghana is more efficient in the production of both cocoa and rice. This is the assumption. Before, what we assumed in the previous example is Ghana was more efficient in producing the cocoa, and South Korea is efficient in the production of rice. But now in competitive advantage, we assume that Ghana is got the more competitive advantage in producing both cocoa and rice. In Ghana, it takes 10 resources to produce 1 ton of cocoa, and 13.13 resources to produce 1 ton of rice. This is the scenario. So Ghana could produce 10 times of cocoa and no rice. This is the first thing. And on the other hand, 15 tons of rice and no cocoa, or something between. I mean, if they are total resources is 200 resources, 200 resources they have for Ghana, and if they utilize all those resources for producing the cocoa, then they would be able to produce 20 tons of cocoa, and no rice. If they utilize all those resources, 200 resources for production of the rice, then they would be able to produce 15 tons of rice and no rice. But optimally, they can stay in between these two figures. For South Korea, it takes 40 resources to produce 1 ton of cocoa and 20 resources to produce 1 ton of rice. As compared to Ghana, both of them are both these production of both things require more resources. So South Korea would produce 5 tons of cocoa and no rice if they are and 10 tons of rice and no cocoa, or something between them. I mean, if South Korea is utilizing all those 200 resources for production of cocoa, then they would be able to produce 10 tons of cocoa and no rice. And on the other hand, if they are putting all those resources to produce the rice, then they would be able to produce 10 tons of rice and no cocoa. But optimally, they have to stay in between those figures. If each country specializes in the production of the good in which it has a competitive advantage and trades for each other, both countries will gain. With trade, with trade, Ghana could, if we go back and see this thing, in comparison for South Korea, rice is much cheaper, or twice cheaper to produce as compared to cocoa, because it requires 20 resources to produce rice and 40 resources to produce cocoa. That's why we can say relatively for South Korea, relatively to production of rice is cheaper. If they trade with each other, Ghana and South Korea trade with each other, Ghana could export 4 tons of cocoa to South Korea in exchange for 4 tons of rice, and Ghana will still have 11 tons of cocoa and 4 additional tons of rice. That would be the advantage of swapping their products with each other. And South Korea will have 6 tons of rice and 4 tons of cocoa. If we see this example, I mean the whole numbers that we had discussed in previous slides for competitive advantage, we can tabulize these figures as in this picture. Like Ghana, in order to produce in the first two rows, we can see these things for Ghana and South Korea. In order to produce cocoa, this is the optimal thing. They are using the 200 resources to produce 10 tons of cocoa and 13.3 tons of rice. On the other hand, if South Korea is using optimally these 200 resources, they are producing 40 tons of cocoa and 20 tons of rice. Ghana production and consumption without any trade. If they are not trading with each other, Ghana is producing 10 tons of cocoa and 7.5 tons of rice, and South Korea is producing 2.5 tons of cocoa and 5.5 tons of rice. Total production is of cocoa is 12.5 and total production of rice is 12.5. Okay. Production with specialization. If both countries stick with their specialized products, what's going to happen? Ghana would be 15 tons of cocoa and 3.7.5 tons of rice. South Korea would produce, if they are sticking with their specialization, South Korea would not produce any cocoa, and they will focus on the rice, and they will produce 10 tons of rice. Total production of cocoa would be in specialization, in terms of when they are doing the specialized production. The total tons of cocoa would be 15 and total tons of rice would be 13.75. If the scenario that we had discussed, that if Ghana trades 4 tons of cocoa with 4 tons of rice with South Africa, what's going to happen? The Ghana would get 11 tons of cocoa and 7.7 tons of rice, and South Korea will get 4 tons of cocoa and 6 tons of rice. In nutshell, what would be the advantage in swapping the product or trading with each other? It will be this is the increase in consumption as a result of specialization and trade. Ghana is end up with the increment of 1 ton of cocoa and 0.25 tons of rice, and South Korea is getting the advantage of 1.5 tons of cocoa and 1 ton of rice. Okay. The just refreshing question is, which theory did not suggest that there could be gains from specialization and trade? Mercantilism, absolute advantage, or competitive advantage? Which theory did not suggest that there could be gains from specialization and trade? Options are mercantilism, absolute advantage, and comparative advantage. You have to think the answer. The answer is first one, mercantilism. Okay. This is the considering we are only focused on these 3 elements, and we intended in this lecture to understand in a good way about these 3 concepts and how these concepts apply on the trade flow. This is a small case study of crawfish in USA, Louisiana, and how Chinese importers, Chinese fish industry affected on this Louisiana's crawfish industry. This is the basic theme of case study, and we have to relate this story, this case study. Why we are doing that? Because this thing is very interesting, and this will be helpful for you to distinguish between the mercantilism and absolute or competitive advantage, and how you are going to relate these concepts on the trade flow. And importantly, we are going to see this case study, and then we are going to relate these concepts, and we are going to think about how we are going to relate these concepts with this case study. Okay, we quickly go through from major points of the case study. Once upon a time, Louisiana was owned by the French. Napoleon sold the territory to the United States when Thomas Jefferson was president, but many of the French stayed on. Over the time, their descendants developed the distinctive Cajun culture that today is celebrated in the United States for its unique cuisine and music. At the heart of that cuisine can be found the venerable crawfish, as Louisianans call the crayfish. The crayfish is a freshwater fish that is native to the Bains to the Louisiana, a central ingredient of the crawfish pie. This is the main ingredient of many dishes, which of crawfish pie, biscuit, etouffee, and gumbo. The crawfish is to Cajun Louisiana what wine is to France, a culinary symbol of its culture. It is also a major industry that generate 300 million per year in revenue to Louisiana crawfish farmers, or at least it did until the Chinese appeared. Main important thing is these Louisiana fish industry is the main ingredient of the many dishes. That this is what this paragraph says, and this industry is generating, and this is the main central activity. Might be this industry is got the pivot facility sort of thing, pivot position within the Louisiana's industry. Louisiana's economic, it is considered as an economic bone within the Louisiana. It generates 300 million per year, and for this state, till Japanese came into that industry. Chinese entered in this industry. Okay, in the early 1990s, when the Chinese entered in this market, Louisiana importers encouraged development of the Chinese industry to meet the growing demand for crawfish. In China, the crawfish industry proved to be attractive for entrepreneurial farmers looking for ways to make the profits. Chinese crawfish first started to appear on the Louisiana scene in 1991. Although old-time Cajuns were quick to claim the Chinese crawfish had an inferior taste, consumer didn't seem to notice the difference. More importantly, perhaps they liked the price, which ran between the $2 to $3 per pound, depending on the season, compared to the $5 to $8 per pound for the native Louisiana crawfish. Important thing is when the Chinese entered in this market, they offered low prices to the market. In reaction, though, the local marketers of Louisiana industry, they said that the Chinese have the inferior taste of fish, but consumer didn't buy this argument. What consumer were looking for, they were looking for the low price, and they were looking for the price what the Chinese offered were the 3 times lower than what the Louisiana industries were offering to the customers. With a significant price advantage on their sides, sales of Chinese imports skyrocketed from 350,000 pounds in 1992 to 5.5 million pounds in 1996. Within 4 years, the amount of revenue they generated is the difference is really huge. By 1996, Louisiana state officials estimated that 300 jobs had been lost in the local industry, mostly minimum wage crawfish peelers, due to the market share gains made by the Chinese. Important impact of this Chinese entrance was that 300 people lost their jobs in the local industry. This was too much for the Louisiana industry. In 1996, the Louisiana's crawfish promoter and research board filed a petition requesting anti-dumping action with the International Trade Commission, an arm of the U.S. government. The petition claimed that the Chinese crawfish producers were dumping their products, selling at below cost to drive the Louisiana producer out of the business. We had discussed the concept of anti-dumping laws. Like this line says that they were providing the product at lower cost, selling the products, their product. Chinese were selling the product at below cost than the Louisiana's products, to just drive out the Louisiana producer out of the market. And they went to the Trade Commission, and the industry requested that the 200 to 300% import tax should be imposed on the Chinese product. 2 to 300 mean that their prices should be between 7 to 9. 200 to 300 mean rather than $2 to $3, it would be between $6 to $9. That would be a bit equal or higher than the US prices. Lawyers represented the Chinese crawfish industry claimed that lower production cost of China were the reasons for the low prices, it is not the dumping. One Louisiana-based importers of Chinese crawfish pointed out that 27 processing plants in China supplied his company. Workers at these plants were given housing and other amenities, and in addition paid 15 cents per hour or $6 for a $9 for a 60-hour week. Also claims these lawyers Chinese crawfish have been good for American consumers who were saved money and benefited from the standardized suppliers and the Louisiana cuisine, and the good for the Louisiana because it has become the less expensive for the cooking. This is the main thing, that the argument that the Chinese were putting. They were saying that from their home country in China, the cost of production is very low, and they are getting these products, and the cost of production is very low, despite they are paying good salaries to their employees, and the working facilities are very good, up to the standards. And despite these things, despite these costs, the overall cost of production is very low. That's why they are offering $2 to $3 per pound to the US marketers. However, the International Trade Commission was deaf on such arguments, using Alice in Wonderland reasoning that the Commission deemed that China is a non-market economy since it is yet a member of the WTO. At that time China was not a member of the WTO. They entered in the market. They joined the WTO in 2001, and they said that this is non-market economy. And what they did after this, they said that since Spanish crawfish sell for approximately twice the price of Chinese crawfish and about the same price as Louisiana crawfish, the Commission. Important thing is what they said that if some other country, if the firms from other countries should sell the crawfish in the US market, that should be there should be some. They were looking for some benchmark, and what they came up with the Spanish example, Spanish firms who are selling their product almost equal rate of the US firm, and they were saying that the Commission stated that when Spanish firms were selling the products at the same rate as the US firms are doing, then how come the Chinese were doing? How come Chinese were selling at the lower price? This is the dumping of products. And in August 1997, the Commission imposed a 110 to 123% duty on imports of Chinese crawfish, effectively negating the price advantage enjoyed by Chinese producers in the interest of the protecting American jobs. And Commission had sided the Louisiana producers. Important thing is these Commission, they took the side of American producers, and they said that they are protecting the local jobs and they are protecting the local industry. That's why they are putting the restriction, putting the ban, putting the tariff. This commission, they put the taxes 110 to 123% tariff on this percent duty on the import of Chinese crawfish. Important thing is why they did it, and was it legitimate to do this sort of action by what the commission did. This is the thing that you guys have to think, and you can search. There is some sort of 2 or 3 articles as well on the crawfish war on the internet about the Chinese and the Louisiana. An important thing that you can search about, this is the case in 1996, when before the period when Chinese joined the WTO, and the situation has been changed after that period, that time, and now you can search the case again, and what is the current situation, and to what extent this situation has been changed because of China's joining of WTO. Now we can do the quick summary of today's lecture. Free trade, this is the first thing that we had discussed. Free trade refers to a situation where a government does not attempt to influence through quotas or duties what its citizens can. They are not influence the products or services through quotas or impose some duties what citizens can buy from other country, or they can produce and sell to another country. This is the important thing. They allow a free trade across the countries. This is called free trade, a free movement of products and services across the borders. This is called a free trade. The pattern of international trade are difficult to explain. And the next thing is mercantilism. After this we had explained the 3 concepts: mercantilism, absolute advantage, and competitive advantage. The first one was the mercantilism, which makes a crude case for the government involvement in promoting export and limiting imports. This is based on a zero-sum assumption that if one country is making advantage, it would be at the cost of other country. Next, in 1776, Adam Smith suggested that countries differ in their ability to produce goods efficiently. A country has an absolute advantage in the production of a product when it is more efficient than any other country in producing it. Being country has to focus on their own strongholds, on the products which they can produce efficiently. They have to stick with those products, and the products that they cannot produce efficiently, they can import those products from the other countries which they can produce efficiently. In the extension of the work of Adam Smith, Ricardo proposed that there are some comparative advantage theory, and their theory propose a comparative advantage theory, and which says that it makes sense for a country to specialize in a production of those goods that it produces more efficiently, and to buy the goods that it produces less efficiently from the other countries. But important point what Ricardo raises is they can do this trade on the basis of efficient production, but they can even continue this trade or swap of products on the efficient basis, even buying goods from the other countries that it could produce more efficiently by itself. Despite those countries produce those products more efficiently in their home country, even then they can make that trade flow, and even then they can get the product from the other country. Like we had discussed the example of USA and China or Pakistan, USA or China or Pakistan or India. Like USA is capable of producing more efficiently computer products and textile products as well, because they have the more state-of-the-art technology in even the textile industry and in the computer industry. But they can, rather than doing both things together, what they can do, they can insert their more focus on the most efficient production, which is their computer products. And they can produce computer products and export those products to India. And rather than producing textile and exporting those textile to India as well, but what they can do, they can produce the textiles they can produce the computer and import to India and import the textiles from India to America. In that way, they can utilize their resources in an optimal way. Thank you for today's lecture. In the next lecture, we are going to discuss the other theories which are the extension of these things. The first one, we are going to see the competitive advantage theory, which would be the competitive advantage theory, OLI paradigm, and the third one we are going to see the Porter's theory. These theories are the extension of the first three theories of mercantilism and absolute and competitive advantages, and we are going to discuss some relevant examples, and we are going to discuss these examples on the basis of these theories. Thank you for today's lecture. Allah Hafiz.